And definitely we'll leave time at the end for questions or even just open discussion. It seems like many of you, know each other, and to what extent, I don't know how often you guys get to see each other. But, one of the things, again, I'm really thankful to Kathy and to Rob for, kind of just even introducing, there's a lot there right now about mental health and stress during a time of COVID, right? You could just Google search those terms and you'd come up with probably 50 different blog posts and articles, and the information honestly can be really overwhelming. And so, I used to teach at the University of Chicago, and I'd have a class that was devoted to just talking about trauma. And so, oftentimes I would be building up, just trust among people. And I realized I'm new to all of you. So, and it looks like someone's asking if you could mute your mics if you're not speaking, just because I think there's some background noise that might help keep down on the ambient noises in the background. So yeah, usually I would kind of work up to that, but since we only have about, 45 minutes or so today, I think to kind of bring expectations to this, I'll share a little bit about my background. And this isn't the kind of stuff that you're going to see, on LinkedIn, or that you're ever going to see in my professional bio. One of the reasons that I got really interested, I think, in just having these open conversations about really difficult moments came from my own experiences. So yes, I have a PhD from Harvard, and yes, I was clinically trained. And so I had all this background, and all of it is, we can call academic knowledge or book knowledge, whatever you want to say. But it wasn't until I went through some of my own traumas, and, at the time I wasn't even necessarily willing to call it that I think it gave me a new perspective. And I think there's a lot of parallels right now, particularly as we think about some of the economic fallout to some of this. So back in 2011, I left a bad marriage, and it was actually on the heels of finishing my PhD. So I was, I now call myself a survivor of domestic violence, but that wasn't a label I would have put on myself back then. And so, skipping all the bad details, by late 2012, I was, finalizing my divorce, and I had to, for anyone who's ever gone through that, it's a messy process. And had to make some financial concessions that were not in my favor. And, signed that paperwork. And 2 days later, my boss called me in and said, we're going to be cutting your salary 30% due to some loss of contracts. And I was devastated, because I had actually started this brand new job, didn't want to tell anybody that I was working with, what I had been going through. And so they had no idea. And that was the first time I finally admitted. And I said, I wish I had known this 2 days before, because I just signed legal documents, and that was based on what my salary was. And now it's kind of screwed me. And I honestly, I cried for 2 days, because 30%, I remember, someone asking me, well, how long can you live with a 30% pay cut? And I said, well, how long could you live with a 30% pay cut? And they didn't have a response. And then, fast forward about 2 months later, and I went to file my taxes, and my lawyer had not advised me, despite getting divorced about 28 days before the end of a calendar year, that I was going to get hit with a really, really, really big tax bill in the thousands of dollars. And so I took 3 very large economic hits within a matter of about 3 months, on top of everything else. And, I look back on those days a lot. And I, at the time, could not see a way forward. It felt like I was stuck in a dark place that I didn't know how I was going to get out of. And I imagine for many of you, regardless if you're running a small business, you're, owning that small business, whatever, if you're working within one of these organizations, you're going to be faced with what feels like an onslaught on any given day of, how am I going to get past this? How am I going to deal with this? And the honest truth is that there aren't any easy answers to that. One of the reasons I wrote the blog post that I did is that one of the biggest lessons I came out of that was learning, that I sometimes just had to sit with that sadness, and not sit with it in a way that meant that I didn't, I gave up on life. But I think acknowledging that it was a really difficult time. And it was really only after I sat there for, what proverbially felt like a while, and realized that I had to get used to kind of being in this place that I was never going to expect, If you had asked me that years before, never in a million years would I have thought that that was going to be my life. And had to kind of figure out, okay, how do I move forward? And that's not going to be an overnight thing. It's not going to be in a few weeks thing. The ironic thing is that, you know, eventually my salary went back up. I had to take a pay cut of 10%, you know, for about a year. You know, I eventually learned to correct my taxes so that, you know, I was not going to get hit with another large tax bill. But there was a time, right? I probably had about $500 to my name that made it really challenging. I didn't have anyone to fall back on. I didn't have, you know, it was the first in my family to go to college, so I did not have anyone to look to say, like, I can't get through this. And I know that there's probably some of you who are like, how am I going to shift things around or pay this bill, or, you know, and it's compounded when you have families. It's compounded when you have employees that are like family to you. Because if you're doing, you know, well with your job, and I know that all of you are, this is a choice to come on to today's webinar, so you care about these things. You care about the folks that you're working with, and it's really, really hard. I remember my sister, you know, we were really close, even was like, I don't know how to help you through this, but I'm here, right? And that's, I think, the good news is that when you're stuck in that, you can't always see how I'm going to get forward, but here I am. And, you know, I think what happened for me fundamentally is that changed how I saw the course of my life. I couldn't have managed it in the beginning or in the middle of that, really, or even at the end. I often tell people now, you know, I was trained as an academic. I worked in state policy as government, and now I work for a Fortune 3, I think, I look at Rob's, like 306. I forget what our exact Fortune 300 number is these days. And I never would have thought that that was going to be my life. I never would have thought that in that moment when I was feeling really despondent about where I was going. I had spent, you know, blood, sweat, and literal tears the prior years up to that, getting my PhD, putting all of my heart and soul into it, and felt really deflated. But there was something that was really great looking back about having to kind of be in that place and reevaluate. And I think, you know, that's kind of the hopeful piece of this, that I don't mean that to say, you know, any of the concerns that you have today are somehow unwarranted, because they absolutely are. It's just about, you might not even be able to imagine what they could be in the future. And I think sometimes just sitting with that, you know, like now that I get to be a social impact investment director, I mean, that's an amazing thing that had I not gone through some of those really difficult moments, I might not have been as free with myself to say, I'm going to go take this risk. I think I took so many more risks after I survived that because I realized I could survive that. And so I think that's like one of the struggles right now. But when you're in it, right, I think one of the things I learned actually in grad school, of all things, was that after I finished my first year, you know, if anyone's ever been in a graduate program, let alone a doctoral program, it's pretty rough, because you all of a sudden feel you are your own worst enemy. And I imagine too, the same is true if you are, you know, running a business. You're like always trying to set new goals for yourself. You're always trying to do better. And I cried, and I would never tell anybody, because I was like, man, maybe this means I'm not cut out for this, and I'm afraid to tell someone I'm feeling vulnerable right now. And I ended up in my second year forming a writing group with several women, and I think for a while we had one guy on our group. And I remember one day I just couldn't take anymore, and I told someone, I was like, I cried for like 2 hours last night because I just can't figure this one stats problem out. And then I had gotten bad feedback on something I had written, and one of my friends looked at me and she's like, oh God, me too. And I think part of this is that there's a shared, especially right now, there is a shared feeling around everything that we're all experiencing, but it can feel really isolating and lonely if we don't talk about that. You know, after I kind of made that statement, it's like a wall came crashing down. And for the next 5 years, I actually just had a Zoom happy hour with this wonderful set of ladies last week, you know, and this has been, at this point, 14 years that we've known each other. And I think there was something really great and profound about having people that you could be real with. You know, I think the chamber certainly serves one avenue for getting to know other people, but part of the way I think everyone can get through these times is to find out, like, who are your people that you can be real with? And by real, I mean, you know, be vulnerable, share when you're feeling really stressed. Because I'll be honest, you know, I could talk to my sister, I could talk to my former husband at the time and say I was stressed about those things, but none of them understood it because they weren't living it. And there's something about, you know, regardless of whatever your particular role is right now, when you are living it, you need to talk to other people who are living it too. And so finding those individuals that you can be honest with and say, this sucks, or I'm not sure, I may have to furlough some employees, I may have to cancel this contract. Because it's just about sometimes being able to say it with someone else who will understand. Sometimes it's not about trying to find, how am I going to solve this? Sometimes it's just being able to give permission and space to say something and have other people say, yeah, that sucks. And yeah, I understand that. And then once you've had time to wrestle with and sit with that feeling, you know, then you can move to another phase of, okay, now how do we get through this? But to rush to the, I want to fix this. I have a very good friend here in Wisconsin who has successfully run multiple businesses. Sometimes he sold them, so, you know, many of them he's still running. And when, you know, the pandemic hit and he had to shut down, I think one of the hardest things for him is that it wasn't something he could fix, because the reason he is so successful at what he does is because he knows how to engineer himself out of a problem. You know, like, he doesn't have an engineering degree, but that is what he does best. He knows how to, you know, code himself out of a problem. He knows how to fix things. There have been many times that we have been sitting, you know, we were at a movie one time. He's like, I have to leave. Something broke with my website. He has poured his life into this. And this was not, you can't fix yourself out of a pandemic. And that's been really hard, because then you, like, you know, in the face of that, all you have to do is sit there. But that doesn't mean that you have to sit there forever. And so, you know, when I've reached out to talk to him, it's just to kind of be like, hey, I get it. You know, like, you're stressed and you're frustrated. And it's not about just like, let's go for a walk, because a walk isn't always going to fix it either. Sometimes it's just about, yeah, this does suck. And when things do reopen, I know that you're going to hustle twice as hard as you did before to get past it. You know, and so there's days that you can probably spend thinking, how am I going to get through this? And there are days that you simply have to say, okay, I maybe it won't come to me. I know that for me personally, if I think too hard on something, right, then it's like, I can't think of the answer, because my brain is probably overwhelmed by 5 million things. And sometimes I just have to walk away and not think about the problem for the answer to actually come to me. And that might be, you know, weeks from now. It's kind of hard to always tell when you're going to find, I think, that piece of it. The thing I always, I think, share too is that you don't, you know, I'm looking at those of you, you know, whether your names or your faces are on the screen. And, you know, I don't know any of you individually, and having met Rob and Kathy and Adam, who works on our team. And I don't know the stories that each of you are carrying, right? Just as I shared a little bit of my story. I think part of this time is also about giving each other grace, and giving that grace to say, I might not know everything that's going beyond behind you, but I'm going to, you know, give you some time and space. There are days that I have to really check myself. Am I frustrated at a person or a situation, or am I just frustrated about 5 million other things that are going on, and it's not really fair to let that frustration out at somebody else? But sometimes when we're on the receiving end of that, I think giving grace to say, we can't always at all times be so self-aware. We're going to have mistakes. We're going to have moments where we have to say, mea culpa, I screwed up, but finding ways to own that, and not in a way that you have to beat yourself up over it. But I think really to say, okay, I understand, I will try to do better. But also, you know, making those spaces for each other. Before most of you jumped on the line, I was speaking of something carrying, you know, the screen behind me is actually, I was in Hanalei Bay, Hawaii, about 1.5 years ago. The untold story behind this, though, is that I had gone to Hawaii in part because I was at a work conference in San Diego, and I needed to get away. My dad has dementia. I had to try to get him a nursing home bed, which was increasingly difficult in Chicago. It had been a year of real struggle. And so Hawaii was going to be my first, like, I'm going to go reset myself. And literally, as I was walking on the plane to board from San Diego to get to Hawaii, my sister texted me and my mom was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. And so, you know, this was supposed to be my time. That was going to be me time. That was going to be rebuilding and reflecting time. And it was still me time, reflecting time, but reflecting time in a whole different way that I did not expect. You know, I often say, I remember sitting on the beach of Hawaii saying, you know, you cannot control the waves. You cannot control how high they're going to be. You cannot control what's going to get thrown at you. All you can control is how you deal with it. You know, I'm not likely to go try surfing because I don't trust myself to have that skill set. But I know that if I'm walking in the water and big waves are hitting me, I have to know that one of them might knock me down and I have to be willing to get back up, you know. And I think all of you are here because you know that this is going to feel on any given day like you're being knocked down, but finding that strength to get back up. And that's why I said there's sometimes ways you have to think about, you know, it's not always going to be clear how that is one of the things I was talking about with Kathy when we were planning for this, you know, and she mentioned, I mean, some of you have children at home, or you have a partner, or you have pets, or you have family members that you're trying to take care of or that you can't see. And all of those kind of compound, you know, anything you're trying to do in your professional life, when your personal life, and especially when all of those things are basically probably happening in the same place. So if you are doing all of your work remotely from your house, and then you're living in your house, and then you're around all of your family, you don't have an escape, right? Like, you can get mad at your spouse or your partner or your kids in ways that you didn't find before, and it's because, you know, you can't go to the gym and go run on the treadmill for an hour, or you don't have those after, you know, work happy hour drinks with friends that you had planned for. And we are all experiencing that, but I think it's really important not to underestimate the strain that can put on just the ability to have those rituals, because that's actually how, you know, I think about the fact that while I don't live with anybody else, there was something that was nice about coming home to see my dog every day when she was so excited. And now it's like, okay, yes, you're barking and I'm on this really important call. You know, like, you start to take things for granted. And, you know, I've talked to, my sister has a near 3-year-old, and there are days that is great. And there are days that her and my brother-in-law are about to, you know, pull their hair out because, you know, she won't go to bed, she won't nap. You know, I know people who have 4 or 5 kids, and also, you know, an elderly parent that they're taking care of. And then on top of everything else you're trying to do with work, it is a lot. It is a lot, it's a lot, it's a lot. And it's not okay, but it will be okay. And sometimes it's that suspension of disbelief that this is the now, this is not the forever, that I think is most critical and important. You know, I have a lot of people that will ask, you know, regularly, like, how am I doing? How's my dad? And I'm like, you know, my dad's now on hospice. I can't see him. There's a lot of things that aren't, you know, great on a day-to-day, but I have to wake up every day and be like, okay, well, how do I want today to go? What is in my control and how I can respond to that versus what is completely out of my control. I don't know when I'll be able to hop on a plane again and do some of the work that I miss doing. I don't know when I'll get to see my family again in Chicago. There's a lot of unknowns that are out of my control. What is in my control is that I can go, you know, plant some grass seed or some dry patches in my front yard, or I can take a walk around my neighborhood. And I've tried to build in new rituals. You know, I think I've heard a lot of people, I don't know how many of you are tired of being on Zoom calls as we sit here on one, but there's this sense of like a distance, right? Even if you're not like hugging someone or sitting like, shoulder to shoulder with somebody, there is a physical comfort that you get from being in the presence of other human beings. And if you're only around, you know, your spouse, or if you're like me living by yourself, that can become really lonely and isolating. And even though you're sitting here talking to people, it's like you see your own self on video reflected at you in a bunch of people's faces. And you know, our brains were not built for just kind of living in these virtual worlds that we are right now. We're all getting through it. But I think, you know, it's important to also recognize that. I've tried to actually be a lot more thoughtful with as the weather gets nicer, going on walks, that even if I see people I don't know and they're, you know, on the other side of the street, so that we have like 15 feet between us, I think just, you know, saying hi to people, looking at them and saying, hey, I see you too. You know, it's not standing and lingering, but it's just getting to see other human beings that for me personally is important. For other people, I know there's lots of introverts out there. Some of my friends actually love this time because they're like, I don't have to interact with other people. But then even they're finding that by saying that, they didn't actually mean it as much as they thought they did, because even if they're an introvert, they still enjoy, you know, getting together and playing a card game with 2 or 3 of their friends, and not being able to do that really stinks. So yeah, I've talked about a lot of things, and I think touched on a lot of topics. I'll give you 3 things that I think are rituals that I've done. But then I think, you know, we're a small enough group that I want to leave time for, you know, discussion, questions, thoughts about people have. So 3 things that I've done in particular, kind of manage it. One I've kind of already talked about. So I've been really trying to coordinate my free time. Whether that's been, you know, reconnecting with folks. Like I said, my writing group, we got to have, you know, drinks last week. And that was just something nice. It was, you know, it's unfortunate that it took a pandemic for me to be like, hey, can we all get together on a call? But it's, you know, we're far flung, we're in 4 different time zones. And so coordinating all of that, you know, was hectic, but there was something nice because I got to learn something new. I hadn't talked to some of them in years, and it was actually really great because we weren't just going to talk about COVID-19 or about work. It was like catching up on, you know, how their kids were doing, you know, how their parents were, all sorts of things. The second is the backgrounds. So as I, you know, have joked to before, probably the first week. So I've actually been on like home lockdown since about May 8th or March. I don't even know what month it is anymore, right? March 8th or 9th, I was in Boston when the Biogen outbreak was becoming clear. And so I left quickly and then was in quarantine while I waited for my own COVID-19 test. So I was getting, I feel like I'm like a few weeks ahead of my team, even in terms of working remotely. So every week I pick a place and I coordinate all of my backgrounds. So I put this one up just because I like this one, but every week I go somewhere I've been in the world. So last week I was in Paris. This week I've been in London. You know, I'll eventually go to Costa Rica. And sometimes I'm like, this photo, you know, as a place I actually took this photo. And it just helps to break up the monotony of not looking at my clock behind my wall and also being like, oh gosh, I really got to fix that paint, or, you know, I really should do, you know, like you start to pick apart your own house if you stare at it long enough, and that's not fair. And I also find it just a nice way to get to talk to people, because then you can ask, oh, what is your background? I think Diana earlier, I asked her about it. I was like, you know, even if it's not yours, come up with an amazing story. It gives us other ways to connect that I think give us something joyful and positive to talk about. And then the third thing I did, which is, it's somewhat silly, although I think Rob's probably seen me now on Twitter. So I started Wig Fridays. And when I say wigs, I mean like pink, purple, like really bright colors. And I have actually 22 wigs. So I used to be on a skee ball league in Chicago. It was not a requirement of being on the league, but it was something that I had done. You know, I joined the league, actually, the timing of it was right after my divorce, and I was looking for something positive to do in my life that had nothing to do with anything professional whatsoever. So the very first game, I showed up in this pink, really curly wig, which I just wore last Friday. And then that became, you know, kind of my second persona. They had been in retirement, as I call them, for the last several years, and then I realized my team probably needed something to laugh about, and it's kind of taken on a life of its own. I think I've done 5 weeks of Wig Friday now. So thankfully I have another 17 if I need to. Really hope we don't need 17 more weeks of virtual visits. But, you know, for me, that's just been and I'll be honest, even like last week, I didn't want to do it. Like I got up and I was like, I took a PTO day. I don't need to show up for my team. And I ended up pushing myself to do it because someone else had said to me, you know, it really makes my day. And even if it's like one person on my team of like, you know, 10 or 12 that it made their day, I ended up doing it and it made me feel better. Like I went actually for a walk around my neighborhood in my pink wig. So I had to go drop off something to a friend that lives in my neighborhood to get his, you know, for his Ring doorbell. He needed like the little screwdriver. So I walked around proudly. There's Rob with my pink wig. So I walked around like that in my neighborhood for, you know, almost like 45 minutes. And saw children, that were like, oh, look at the lady in the pink hair, because I've actually had people ask me that wig in particular, is it real? And there's like metallic red streaks in it. And I was like, if someone has figured out how to color their hair metallic red, by all means tell me, but no, there's nothing real about this hair. And I think it's just about laughing. And so I'm not telling you to go start your own Wig Friday. But sometimes it's just about finding like something that's authentic to you. For some people, I have had friends who've dropped by that, they drop by like little cakes for all of their friends, and they haven't done it all on the same day. They intersperse them. I've seen people dropping off beers, to their friends' houses, and then, sitting in their car and drinking or doing, beer drink challenges. I mean, you have to find something that fits you and like, figure out like, what is it that made you most happy and joyful before we were all in this lockdown, and figure out a way to do that. If you're working with your employees, figuring out ways, again, there's something for me personally, like showing that we're all human beings, because, when we're in this, we have our professional selves, and that doesn't mean that we all of a sudden have to become unprofessional. But I think there's something real when people are able to say, I'm having a rough day. Because anytime, I used to give presentations around the state when I did anti-human trafficking work, and inevitably every single time I probably gave 50, 60 presentations, small audiences, several hundred people, I would always have one person that would come up to me. And because it wasn't about me talking about being a survivor of domestic violence, but even just making that statement at some point, that would come up and say, thank you. And they didn't have to tell me what they went through, but it was something about being real and authentic and saying, yeah, I also have this thing in my background. And you can, I even had people just come up to me and just said, thank you. And they would stare at me with their eyes, and they didn't even have to say it. And I knew what they were trying to do. I knew what they were trying to say. And sometimes that's what we have to do during these times, is just be real. Like every time I've ever been real, I have never regretted that. Never once. I've never once regretted it. In fact, when I took my current job, I remember during one of my interviews, I shared with my boss, who's now retiring, the story about kind of what was something that I challenged. And I basically told him that story I started with, about how my life kind of kept falling apart economically, blow after blow. And I said, I had never told anyone I was working with. And he's like, can you imagine a world in which you had told them? Can you imagine a world in which it would have been okay to admit what you were going through? And I'm like, yeah, it would have changed my entire outlook. But I wasn't working in a place that I felt like supported that. So if you're in a place that you can support that for your staff, that's something you're in control of and you have the power to do, is to say, it's okay, and it's not simply about, work productivity. It's just about like, hey, it's okay to say, I had a crappy day. I'm having a crappy week. I'm having a crappy month, I'm having a crappy year, whatever it is, because then at least it makes us all human. And that's, basically all we can be during this time. So I'm going to stop, because I've been talking a lot, and I also need a sip of water. But, welcome thoughts, comments, questions.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Joy. Let's, great place to stop. Let's open it up to some questions or anything anybody wants to share right now.
Dr. Joy, you talk about, finding things that de-stress, right, and help you through this. And you do your wig days. I've been doing, I used to be a long time ago, like, 40 years ago. I used to be a musician and played in a garage band when I was in high school and college, and have not really played much since. But over the last few weeks, I've decided to pick that back up again. And it's amazing. First of all, I had to get my fingers in shape to play the guitar, which they were not. But I post a song every day on my Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. I post it every day. And I am just absolutely, first of all, it brings me joy to do it. It's fun again to play. But what I'm really amazed by are the responses and the people that I have not talked to in 30 years. Who were on Facebook or whatever, and they're like, oh my God, I remember that song when we were at prom, or I remember that we did this, and just the sheer joy they have of that. So you're right about, if you're yourself and expose yourself and who you really are deep down, because I don't think anybody, I know most people in American Family, even though I've been there 32 years, had any idea that I could play guitar at all. And I was invited today actually to one of the teams in Madison to do a little song of the day for their lunch get together. But to me, it's just this being yourself helps you get through these things, right? And when you share that with others, you're real. I guess maybe this is what I'm trying to say, Joy.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely true. And I mean, now more than ever, as I said, you know, this virtual our virtual selves, you know, you can feel this suspension of like, who am I really? And so finding those components of yourself to share with others, or just even, you don't have to share it with the world, right? Like some people still think like, how could you post a video of you playing guitar, right? Or how could you post a photo of you wearing a crazy wig? And then like, you don't have to do, you know, it doesn't have to be public, but I think just giving yourself permission to do it is half the battle.
Okay. I think we're a small enough group. If you want to just chime in, you can.
I'm also thinking too, right? I mean, I've seen, you know, I've been watching as much as I can, you know, heads nodding and, you know, smiles. And, you know, for those of you who've maybe stayed, you know, off video, I hope that's, you know, if it's a sense of like you needed some moments to yourself and didn't want to be on video, that's perfectly okay. But I want to acknowledge that too, right? Like it's sometimes hard to sit on video if we're feeling like, how am I going to talk about my difficulties? Or if you're feeling like choked up about something as you reflect on your own life situation, that's okay. But if you're there, not on video, and you want to chime in too, by all means, please pipe in.
I will share something that I've been kind of working my way through. My team and many people in the community, but not everyone, knows that my husband has dementia. And so it's been within the last couple years. And so, you know, having to make that adjustment to that work-life balance was one thing. And now having to work from home, it's been really challenging. And I just will start out with saying the first week I worked from home, I went and actually told my chairman of the board, I can't do this. I'm going to go to the office because this is not conducive for him or for me. Mm-hmm. And then I decided that really wasn't fair to myself or him. That it's just kind of like, I have to find a way to deal with the reality of all of this. And so what's been interesting for me is that I have found that one of the things when we first started going through this change in our lifestyle was I started getting up early in the morning. And when I was first at home, I thought, you know, I can sleep in, I can, you know, get up when he does, I can, you know, do all those things that you think are great when you first start working from home. And I think that's why it didn't work for me. And so I'm back to getting up early because the one thing I have found is I struggle if I do not have me time. And, you know, I don't know about anybody else, but when you're home and you don't have the commute in the car to be alone, or you don't have the transition from one thing to another, it just seems all the same, and it seems to kind of just start swallowing me. And I have just found that, gosh, I need that. I need time. I don't know that I really yet have enough of it, but that's, I think, one of the things that I find really hard about working from home and all of this social distancing. And you'd think that, you know, with all the social distancing, you wouldn't need time alone, but it's the me time, I think, that's hard because I don't feel I have it.
No, I think that's one of the things that for me, like I have too much me time, but then I think about like, what are those rituals of getting myself like into, like I'm used to seeing other people. And so how do I recreate that? Or like, I think about my sister and I constantly tell her like, you know, if you're constantly around other people, you need to create a schedule for your me time. And, you know, and you might not be able to hold it to it every single day. But, you know, especially if you have young kids, like one parent needs to be able to, take a walk for a half hour or something like that. You still need that individual time to like basically let your brain reset. It's really, I've seen people that are saying like, wow, I love it, I'm getting to spend time with my family. But then it's hard if you're like, oh my God, I want to like strangle my kids today, or like, oh my gosh, my husband's driving me up the wall. So I think having, as you said, Kathy, those me time moments are more critical than ever before. And because we can't do them in the ways we were maybe used to before, figuring out whatever that is for you, even if it's like, I'm going to go in the garage, and do something for an hour. I don't know, it could be even just walking around your backyard. But yeah, it's really, really key right now. Are there
Terry.
things that, I didn't, oh, go ahead, Terry.
Oh, sorry about that. This is Terry. I
No.
am the interim executive director for the Downtown Issaquah Association. And I also am a merchant in the downtown. And I have been on several of the calls that Kathy, you have put together. And I'm just so grateful for that, because we are working with all of the different businesses in our area. And we focus a lot on logistics because we're planners. And it's just nice to take a step back and to think about, wow, the emotional impact. And I think that we as leaders sometimes harden ourselves to that, because we need to be able to be present for our businesses and be able to give them direction about how to, fill out those forms for the loans and how to create a plan for opening back up. But, and we hear them struggle. And when we look at other communities who are canceling their events, we can feel their pain and how it really is affecting the whole community when you have to cancel an event. And I'm about to start crying. I'm grateful for this opportunity. Thank you for just bringing this to light. It's important for us to understand that we are all connected, and it's important for us to be reminded to have some laughter and some joy in our lives as we go through this. The good tips.
No. Thank you, Terry. I think one of the things I didn't mention, but it's something I always say is, we can't be good for others if we're not good for ourselves. We can't drive ourselves into the ground, and I see smiles because I'm sure many of you are used to doing this, right? We drive ourselves into the ground on behalf of others because that's what we do. That's how we lead. But if you're not being able to bring your best self forward, if you're burnt out, if you're struggling, if you're emotionally ragged, we can't be there for others in the ways that they deserve and probably the ways that they need. And so, I think acknowledging that and saying, thank you for sharing that you're crying, because that's real. That is a real moment. And, it doesn't mean that you have to share it with everybody. We don't have to walk around and tell every person we see I'm struggling, but finding the places that we feel safe to do that. And if we're leaders, it behooves us to create spaces where people feel free to say that, because that's just as important, is that we need to keep spaces that people feel like they can tell us what's on their mind. So thank you.
You're welcome.
This is Tori, and I'd like to start by saying happy birthday, Kathy.
Oh.
Yes, happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Kathy. Nice.
I'm sorry you're having to spend it on your own, and just, in light of all this, it's hard. I had my birthday party by myself too, so. Actually, I have
it's hard.
I have my husband and my brother who has special needs, and I'm used to working from home, and it's very comfortable for me. I'm in one of those comfortable stages but because they're not able to go do things, they keep talking to me, which is terrible, and I love. But my brother used to be gone all day long, and now he's home each day. And because he doesn't have anything to do, the minute I get up at my 5:30, 6 o'clock time for my me time, Kathy, he's saying, hi, do you know what the weather's going to be today? We're going to do this. He goes, so you do miss that me time. And I actually think that's what's cool about these Zoom meetings, is that it bores them to death. This is
that's good.
My me time. So, anyway.
See, and then maybe maybe that's your way forward, right? Is to schedule Zoom time, and it looks like you're still in a meeting, and you know that. And that's why I said for each person it's going to be different, but maybe that will be a good way for you to stay connected and get that downtime.
Right.
Oh, that's great.
Dr. Joy, I have a question because Terry made me think about the fact that many of us also have employees. And do you have any tips, both from the standpoint of, again, you know, we can't show necessarily how we're feeling, although my staff will tell you I do all the time. But, you know, you have to be there for them, and you have to be strong for them. But where's the kind of, we're not their counselors. We're not experts like you are. So do you have any suggestions about how, maybe how and the appropriate ways to be there for our staff? Because, I worry about them and their morale and their struggles, but I'm not a counselor. I don't have your background. So I'm also worried about, am I doing the right thing?
Yeah, no, those are great points. And I think, you know, even for those of us who have clinical training, right, that's always about too, like I manage staff and I can't also be their therapist, but I try to sometimes ask questions, you know, in a therapeutic way. So, you know, I think there's small ways to do that is to say, you know, like one of the things I think that's hard is, and I think I talked about this in the video that Adam had done that accompanied the blog was, you know, about sitting with silence. And I wrote about it too. You know, we need to be able to ask questions like, how's everyone doing? And then if it's like 30 seconds of silence, which actually feels like 5 minutes, not then just jump to, okay, and now we need to go on to the next thing. I think part of it is just modeling the ability to say like, not just saying like, how are you doing, but like, what is one of the biggest struggles you've had in the last week? You know, like asking more pointed questions and then being like, okay, what is one of the things you want to commit to in this next week? Like asking, you know, kind of specific questions, giving people, you know, and everyone, if they don't want to answer, that's okay. But setting aside time out of your regular meetings or, you know, however you're meeting these days, to just give people a chance to feel is probably the biggest way that you can be helpful. You know, a lot of folks are struggling right now, but that doesn't mean they need a therapist. It doesn't mean that, you know, because I mean, you know, I had therapy to go through some of the things I went through. But for me, it was because like I wasn't, you know, I was barely able to function some days. And so I needed that support. For a lot of folks, I think, you know, there's kind of a two-step process where it's like, if you ask that question and most people are like, yeah, I'm dealing with this. Or if someone's like, I don't know what to do, you know, Tori, I think you had a perfect example of like, I get off a call and then my brother wants to ask me about the weather, you know, and some people might give suggestions among the team, like, well, have you tried this? Or, you know, I have that with my kid, or I have that with, you know, and sometimes it's about almost like crowdsourcing ideas of how to move forward. And sometimes it's just about treating the space that you realize other people on your team are experiencing the same things. When then you have someone else who's like, I can't get out of bed every day, you know, or someone approaches you and says, you know, or they're like, you find that they're not doing work, you know, then I think that's more of a, how do you refer someone, you know, to kind of get therapy or support? And I think, you know, the answer to that kind of depends on a multitude of factors. So, you know, if you offer an employee assistance program, certainly that's step one because they're set up for that. If not, you know, I think understanding, you know, if your health insurance, you know, a lot of folks different things are being offered. I don't know particularly what either your county or state are offering, but I know many states are kind of offering emergency responder type. How do we provide short-term care to folks? You know, even though my clinical license is expired, I've signed up in Wisconsin to be an emergency, you know, kind of volunteer responder because I know that those mental health professionals that are there are kind of overburdened and overtaxed right now. Like they can't see every single person who needs support. So if I'm able to do that in some way, you know, I'm willing to volunteer my time to do that. So, you know, I don't know the specifics of what's offered there, but I think part of that is just being able to be prepared to have that conversation. And I think too, you know, to the extent that you can, you know, being a little flexible with folks on, you know, whether it's their hours or if they're working, you know, I think a lot of people have already put thought into this, but like, you know, can they do the work in the evenings or on the afternoons? Will that help, you know, eliminate some of the stress? You know, one of the things I ask my staff are, what is something I could help you with right now? Like, you know, is there anything that I personally can do? And that's something that I've tried to build all along, not just because of this. And so I think if you have those trusting relationships with your staff, hopefully they'll tell you. And, you know, if you feel like you haven't, now is not a bad time to start. But you don't need to feel like you have to be a therapist by any means. So I think it's just about knowing the resources available and then, you know, leaving that space open that, you know, they might not want to tell their boss, you know, I'm struggling. But even if you're like, hey, you know, we encourage you guys to have a Zoom happy hour, even if you're not there. You know, our team, we've been having, one of the other directors has been sponsoring virtual happy hour and we played Jackbox TV games. And that's been fun. You know, we don't talk work. And so, you know, mental health is often thought about as like someone is like struggling and suicidal or something else. And it's not that. Sometimes it's just about like, as I, you know, titled my blog with the sadness and making sadness okay. I don't know if that's helpful, Kathy, to your point. I'm sure you probably tried some of those things too as well.
Well, I think it's more just the question of you know, wanting to be a good a boss, wanting to be sensitive to the team, and again, you know, not wanting to overstep or again, you know, when is advice really the right thing to do? I think what you've said and what I've heard a lot from you today is just, you know, being able to talk about our situations, being able to share and letting them share, and just basically sometimes it sounds like probably one of the most important things we can do for our mental health is to find someone to talk to and to share with, whether that's a friend or a family member, to just say, you said it earlier, admitting it sucks, you know, and just being able to say that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, you know, it's like, even though we have to be leaders, you know, depending on the persona you have, it's like, you don't want to, you know, I think people will know if you're lying to them. If you're like, no, everything's fine and it's not fine, like they're going to see right through that, particularly because all we have to do right now is stare at people on screens. So, you know, we're not going to believe if you're not being authentic. I think it's, you know, how you share the information and kind of the ways you know, we can't always share everything. You know, most of our staff know that. We, you know, we share what we can when we can about any kind of decision, not just during the pandemic. You know, I remember I like many weeks I start off when we have team meetings, I'm like, how's everyone doing? You know, one time someone jumped in and was like, okay, well, move on to the next topic. And I was like, wait, you know, like, let's roll back to that point. And that's why I mean, like, not just asking the question, but like also stepping up if you're a leader to say, we didn't spend enough time on this openness, even if the openness ends up being like I said, that 30 to 60 seconds of silence. The silence at least has then built the trust that next week, if you ask that question and someone wants to say something, they know that they'll be able to. And then when I have one-on-ones with people, you know, that's a very different, because then I think, you know, not everyone's going to want to share their personal background. You know, 5 years ago, I wasn't sharing my personal story in front of strangers. That took a lot of work. I'm not advocating that you tell everyone everything in the kitchen sink about yourselves. But I think, you know, just modeling that and knowing, you know, hopefully when to ask, as you said, you don't have to ask too many invasive questions. I think just letting people know, I'm here if you need something. I may not be able to help you get what you need, but I'm here to listen and direct you to the right resource. That's probably the best we can all say right now. I know we only have just a few minutes, so I don't know if there's any other final thoughts or questions anyone wanted to pipe in with. And I really appreciate those of you that are here that are smiling or just staring at the screen, even if you didn't, you know, I think just the fact that your participation is here with your smiles and your faces, it's been really nice. I don't blog regularly, although I think Adam has said I should, so maybe I'll blog more. But yeah, you know, feel free to, you know, reach out to me on LinkedIn and stay connected that way. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll get to find, you know, my wig Fridays. I have not yet decided which wig will be. I usually decide like the morning of, like, what is my mood today? But yeah, I think just continuing to stay connected in the ways that we can. And if there's a question that you didn't feel comfortable asking me on this, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to try to also direct you in the best way that I know how as well.
Okay. And Dr. Joy, I really appreciate it. I know I wrote down several things and we didn't really circle back to this, but the other thing that had really hit home with me today is the giving each other grace, because I've talked to many people that have great families and they love them dearly, but it does seem to be, we tend to turn to our partners and express our frustrations and our joy and everything about life. And as we grow increasingly worried, we grow increasingly frustrated. And I think sometimes, it's hard to share too much of that or hear too much of it. And you want to, well, I'm frustrated too, sort of thing. And you want to bite back. And so I really appreciate the comment and the advice about remembering to give each other grace, owning a mistake when we do let situations get the best of us. The other little thing that you said that was very impactful was just also going for a walk by yourself. Because I do think that's the other thing is everyone I talk to is just like, oh, well, we're all going out biking. We're all going out on a walk. And again, we're together 24/7. And I will say that it reminded me personally that my husband and I had a unique start to our marriage in that we had lived together for 4 years. We got married and we moved apart for 2 years. And we pretty much got married because we knew we were going to go live in separate cities and we wanted to know we were going to be there for each other when all this was over. But when we moved back into the same house together, it was hard. It was just like, who is this stranger in my bathroom brushing their teeth when it's, when I'm used to just walking in and being able to brush my teeth whenever I want. So I feel like we're going through that sort of thing where we're just together with each other under one roof all the time. And I have talked to a few people that are just like, okay, I'm going crazy. I don't have, I love them dearly. I love my partner. I love my kids, but like Tori said, I wake up in the morning and they're, hey, how's it going? And so to me, I just wanted to kind of wrap back up that those are the takeaways for me personally. Give myself that space, go for a walk by yourself, allow myself the grace to lose it every once in a while. And then again, just to know that that I can't control it and that it sucks, and admitting that I just cannot control that situation, I think is extremely great advice in helping all of us cope with having this new world kind of just so immediately thrust upon us. This is not a gradual change. This is a dramatic change in the world for all of us, and it's so new and it's happening so fast that I think that's also part of the problem. So I want to thank you for your words of wisdom today. I want to thank all of you that attended. We did record today's session, so in a few days we'll have it out there, so that if you know of anyone that you think could value in hearing today's presentation, please feel free to share the link with them when we do make it available. And Dr. Joy, again, thank you for joining us. I really, truly appreciate it.
I have a quick question.
It was wonderful to meet all of you. Oh yeah.
What do you think about, like, I know we're probably a lot of us that have small businesses, we're kind of in the same situation where I worked so hard to build something that I'm now seeing deteriorate in front of my eyes. Like, what advice do you have for that? And like, what is the mindset you should have for that going forward? Like, is it okay to feel that way? What should I be thinking right now? Because right now I'm working harder than I've ever worked, but still, like, I'm seeing it really slowly deteriorate away.
I mean, that's very real. So I think part of it is giving yourself permission to feel whatever you're feeling, right? And I mean, you can ask me, how should I feel? And I'm like, you should feel however you're feeling right now. It sucks. Like, you've put all of your, you know, livelihood, I'm sure, into developing your business. And as you just said, to see it disintegrate, and, you know, and slowly, like, that's not an easy thing to sit with. So I think acknowledging that feeling, and I think that's the hard part, is that sometimes just saying the feeling is like, okay, and now what? And sometimes I can't, and no one can say, and here's the now next step. But I think part of it is just, you know, I don't know if you had come in a little bit later, you know, when I started off my life, you know, and I was in this dark place and I had blow after blow after blow, and I felt like I was never going to get out of, like, which way is my path forward? And part of it was just, I don't want to say surrendering to the process, because that sounds like you give up and that, you know, you're letting the world take over. But sometimes it's simply a matter of like, okay, I'm going to get through this somehow. On any given day, I don't know what that is. Other than, like, you know, I used to celebrate just the fact that I got up. And that sounds really harsh, but I mean, the fact that even you got up, you're here on a webinar about how do we deal with our stress, puts you in a really good place, because you at least know that you got up today, you got dressed, right? Like, all of those things, we can't discount that. In terms of the where it goes next, you know, I don't know, not knowing your specific situation. And even if I did, probably, right, not knowing all of the things that go into that. But my guess is that there are other people connected to the chamber who are feeling exactly the way you are right now. And so, you know, either organically, or maybe Kathy's aware of, you know, like, connecting with someone else, even just to talk through, like, what it is you're feeling right now, or just feel like, oh my God. Like, I mean, there's something, you know, I mean, you know, I don't want to, I know we're recording this, so I don't want to, like, use too many swear words, right? But we have, like, you know, like, bad sessions where we just want to talk about all the things that are, you know, problematic in our lives. But sometimes there's catharsis in that, even if it's just to scream and swear and do a lot of things. And, you know, that can be weird to do with strangers, but what you're experiencing is super real. And I think the hard part is that there isn't an answer right now. But, you know, I think one of the most amazing things is that if you've built something once, you're going to figure out how to rebuild. And that might not be clear to you right now. I don't think for many of us what that rebuilding looks like is clear.
Yeah.
But simply knowing that there is going to be a rebuilding. Like I said, I would not have thought I'd be sitting here having this conversation, you know, from the position that I'm in, you know, 5 years ago in my life. And so, but that's hard, because I got really tired of the people that would tell me that. I got really, really mad at people, honestly, who would tell me that it was going to be better, because I wanted to tell them, you know, not such nice words, because I was like, well, you don't get it. And, like, that's actually the point, is that no matter how much empathy and how much bad stuff I've experienced, I probably don't fully understand where you are right in this moment. And so, you know, someone saying it's going to get better probably doesn't make the situation any better. But I can say, somewhat sheepishly, right, everyone who told me that, it actually was true. It took longer than I thought it was going to. It was not without many setbacks along the way, but it did happen. And so from wherever you can find that strength, for some people that's faith, for some people that's pure determination and grit, for some it's family, you know, turn to those support networks that you have.
Thank you.
And I also add, this is Terry from DIA. Steve,
Yes.
I just want to remind you, Stephen, and everybody else, to keep plugging away at the SBA loans and all those other sources that can bring money to your business. Do not give up. Keep calling them. Keep checking on your status. Keep asking if they need anything else. Check it, check it, check it. It will come through. You got to have faith and just be available to opportunity, and keep your eyes open and keep going after this money that's coming our way. It is coming.
Mm-hmm. That's great, Terry.
And Stephen, I will say I've known you since you opened your business, and what Dr. Joy said about you done it already. You are an entrepreneur. You're one of the most creative talents with your dance studio I've seen in a very long time. And I know it's not, again, it's not a solution, but you will find your way through this.
Thank you.
You are one very talented, smart man. And I have no doubt that whatever is ahead of you, you're going to come out on top.
Thank you, Kathy.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, so again, now we're just a little bit over our time. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Joy, for being here and letting us have this great, open, and honest conversation with you.
Absolutely. Hopefully one day I get to see all of you in person with your smiling faces, but until that time, feel free to reach out if you guys need anything.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining
Bye-bye.
today.
Bye.
Oh, and just real quick, I should tell you, next week, our session will be on the unemployment for self-employed. So I know this week is a hard time getting everybody to get through. Lines are super busy. So we will have an expert here with us next week to help about that. So you'll be getting an email from me and a calendar announcement, but that will be the subject for next Wednesday at 1. So thanks again, everybody.